Hi, today we're going to preview version 12 of the Mobile Impact Platform's My Analytics data and visualization modules. What we'll see is a form designed in our Next-Gen Designer that takes advantage of a new ability to automatically create SQL data tables without having to pre-provision them. We'll then see how that data can be analyzed through reporting tools and published to My Analytics visualization module. Alright, we're going to start in the Next-Gen Designer. I've logged in as a user that has permissions to design and edit forms. As you can see, there's a food establishment report, a park inspection, and a sample form. We're going to be using the food establishment report primarily for this demo. I've already built most of it, so I can go ahead and click on it here to take a look. Now, we have other videos that talk about how to use the Next-Gen Designer, so we're not going to go over each of those design aspects here, but I think it's useful to take a quick tour through what we've put together. As you can see, we have an establishment page here set up. This is where the inspector is going to identify where they're performing their inspection. And if we click on our data tab here, we see that we have a set of food establishments that have been provided as a data source for us. We'll see how that lookup works when we actually fill this form. On the following page, we have a checklist of a few questions about the various health, hygiene practices, and other sort of restaurant inspection information. This isn't a full inspection by any means. We didn't create every question you could possibly answer here, but we thought it was pretty representative for the purposes of what we're putting together in this video. On the following page, we have temperature observations. Here, we allow an inspector to indicate the recorded temperature of things like the freezer, the refrigerator, the stove, and so on. As you can see, there's a grid here where this data is going to be recorded in, and we'll see how that works when we report on this data later on. There's a violations grid as well. This will be auto-populated from anything that is marked out of compliance from the previous checklist, and we'll see how that works when we fill the form as well. And lastly, there's a place where the score and the grade and signatures and the timeout are recorded here as well. These are all standard elements within our design software. But the new thing here is that we can click on our results tab and we see that we have this option of an automatic SQL export. If I check that box, it's going to ask me to choose a data connection. I only have one available in this customer, and that's the video reporting demo. This is a connection to a SQL database that does not have any information about the schema of this form or anything about the data that is going to be recorded. All that will happen when our first submission is pushed to the server. So all we have to do here as a designer is pick that and save our form. Now I'm going to log into the My Apps client. I'm using the Windows client here, but the experience would be the same on iOS or Android, your phone. I log in as Jay Smith here, and I see that Jay Smith has two forms available to him: food establishment report and park inspection. Again, we're going to use the food establishment report for most of this demo, but park inspection will be interesting a little bit later when we're reporting on some of this data. When I start the food establishment report, it allows me to choose an establishment, and I'll pick Bob's Crab Shack. When I do that, the rest of this information is automatically filled from our data source. I'll pick today's date, the current time, and a purpose of inspection as being routine. When I page to the next area of this form, I have my checklist questions that we saw during the design side. I'm going to mark most of this in compliance because Bob's Crab Shack is a pretty good place to eat, but I'm going to say that maybe we observed hands clean and not properly washed, perhaps. In fact, maybe there's also a bare hand contact, so I'm going to mark those both out of compliance. As I mentioned during the design portion of this video, we have the opportunity to record temperature. I'm going to pick the freezer and record that it was 3 degrees. The refrigerator, record that it was 39.5 degrees. And maybe an example oven that we recorded at 450 degrees. You'll see that each of those are recorded in this temperature observations grid. Violations are automatically populated for me. If I click this, we will see that item numbers 6 and 7 were violated, the text of that violation, and a proposed correction date, in this case 1 month in the future. When I go to the last page of this form, I see that the restaurant was scored a 75, which grades out to a C. Maybe Bob's Crab Shack isn't where I want to eat after all. I will ask Bob to sign this, of course. I'll sign it as the inspector. And of course we did this quite quickly, so I'll just change my time out a little bit there and submit this form. That sends it off to the server, and when that happens, we will automatically export data to the backend reporting database. Now that I've submitted some inspections, I want to report on my data. Now recall, I did not have to create any sort of backend database tables. That all has happened automatically for me. But firing up my Power BI Desktop Designer, I'm going to ask it to go take a look at that data. I'm going to ask it to look at a SQL server, and specifically a database that was created for this. And it'll go ahead and take a look at my available data here, my available tables specifically. You'll notice here that a few tables near the top are basically system level tables, our database version, some table mapping, and session. I'm going to bring in this session table because we're going to use it to report on some information, but the ones that I'm primarily interested in are the food establishment report and these two other tables that are related. You recall there are temperature observations and violations, and each of those has been recorded in its own tables that are related to the main food establishment report that I'll of course also bring in. When I click load there, Power BI will go ahead and evaluate the relationships between these tables and make them available to me for design. Okay, now that Power BI has brought our data in, let's get started taking a look at it. What I'm going to do is add a table, and then I'm going to pick a couple of fields in my food establishment report. I'm going to start with the date, the establishment, and the score. Now, you might notice that the date is being separated already into its component parts, and I can certainly go ahead and put those back, but this is a good indication that the data that is actually stored has some typing information on it. The dates are stored as dates, the score is stored as a number, so Power BI is able to do things like, in this case, get a summation. We actually want to change that to an average of our score here, and we can see that it all plays pretty nicely. I can also do some sorting here and say maybe you want to see the most recent things first there. And this starts to give me a view of the data that's recorded. But where it gets interesting is when we start combining this with other information as well across the different relationships in the form. So let me go ahead and add another table. And in this table, we're going to take a look at violations. So let's just go ahead and add the item number and the violation text. Now this is all of the violations that have ever been recorded, but what we can do here is if we click, for instance, on Greg's Wings, we see that it's had 2 violations, or at least 2 violations during this inspection. Whereas we click on Bob's Crab Shack, we see that it had a different 2 violations. And then actually Bob had a previous inspection here where he only had a single violation. And that relationship between clicking on the inspections here and seeing the violations, it happens automatically. I don't have to do anything to set that up. We can also do things like see which violation occurs most often. We do that by adding this other column, the session ID column, and say rather than unique values there, we want a count instead. So we can see here that items 1, 2, and 6 have been violated 1 time a piece, whereas item 7 has been violated twice. We have 5 total violations. Of course, we can do things to make this look nicer by renaming that. We can say number of times violated, for instance, something like that. Now, beyond tabular data, we also want to see graphical data fairly often from these sort of forms. So let's go ahead and add a column chart. And in this one, what we're going to go ahead and do is take a look at the temperature information instead. So what I will do is I will drag our temperatures as our value, add our access to be our item location to be access there. So now what we're taking a look at, and especially if I make this a little bit larger, is we're taking a look at the average temperatures of the different items here. Actually, it's the sum right now. We can change that to the average. The average temperature recordings of all of those different items. Now, again, this is linked to our inspections up above. So if I click on Bob's Crab Shack here, we'll see that it gets narrowed down to just the observations I made during that visit. Whereas, of course, if I were to click on another one here, maybe that one didn't have any observations. Maybe one earlier only had a refrigerator observation, and so on. And that gives us the power, again, to just start to slice and dice our data around here based on the different criteria we might want. Speaking of slicing things, we can add an actual slicer. And what we might do there is we might take the date of inspection. And now we've got this nice little slider here that allows us to say, well, only show us inspections, for instance, maybe in February here. And that will narrow those. If we want to go a little bit further, maybe ones that only took place over the last couple of days, and we see that gets narrowed again. All of these other items would get narrowed as well as we go ahead and do that. Now, another thing we can do with our data visualization is not just report on a single form, but maybe we want some sort of aggregate statistics. So let me add another page to my report here. And rather than looking at the food establishment report, I'm going to look at this session table here. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to drop in a clustered bar chart. And I'm going to take my last uploading user and make that my axis, and go ahead and add values over here. And then form name as my legend here as well. And what we're going to see, if I expand this a little bit to make it a little bit more visible, is we quickly see how many of each type of inspections each user has submitted. So E. Anderson has submitted, looks like 1 park inspection, but 5 food establishments. J. Smith is up to 3 food establishments. My administrative users submitted a sample form earlier on when I was testing out this video. But this allows us to see the productivity of inspectors over time. We're not looking at the individual values of these forms, but we're able to see how our organization is performing. We can again do something like add a slicer here as well. And in this case, we might use the last uploading date instead. And we could see, we could use that to narrow our range. We see only J. Smith has uploaded stuff today. If we go back a couple of days, then we get back to everybody else's view. Now, the last thing we're going to do is upload this data to my analytics. So if I go here and pick publish to Power BI, and I'm going to go ahead and pick a workspace that I've provisioned for this. Power BI will go ahead and upload that and have a connection to My Analytics where we can make these tables available, make these dashboards, I should say, available for other users. We see that it's been successful there. Now I'm going to configure My Analytics. I've already gone to my dashboard administration. I'm going to choose this inspection dashboard, and then I'm going to view its charts and create a new one. I select my Power BI workspace where I publish the report, select that report, and give it a name. I'll also say how high in percentage of screen height I'd like this report to look. I'll save that and then go to my inspection dashboard here. Just like we saw in Power BI Desktop, I now have the ability to navigate this chart. I can choose Bob's Crab Shack again and see everything get filtered there. I can actually go ahead and expand one of these views if I need to, including this chart here, if I'd like to do that. And of course I can click over on page 2 here to see how productive my inspectors have been in a given time period, just like we saw before. Thank you for spending some time looking at our upcoming product features. For more information, please contact my corporation technical support at support@mi-corporation.com and watch this channel for more videos.